Hi, I'm Nicki from the Living Water Partnership, and today my colleague Peter and I will be talking to you about a really exciting project about redesigning agricultural drainage networks. But first, what is Living Water? It's a $20 million 10-year partnership between the Department of Conservation and Fonterra, and together we seek to find solutions that will enable farming and freshwater to thrive side by side. The partnership was formed in 2013, so we're now in year 9 with just less than 2 years to go. We work across 5 sites in the country, and at every site we work with mana whenua, councils, farmers, and many others. And land drainage schemes are common to all of our sites. Today we're going to focus our talk in the Canterbury site and the Ararira catchment. So highlighted in green is the Ararira catchment, a small sub-catchment of Te Waihoara. There are 9 Fonterra farms and a network of man-made drainage schemes throughout the region that are managed by Selwyn District Council. These drains, like many others in New Zealand, were literally dug out, some of them by hand in the early years. And then through the 1950s and 60s, the New Zealand government subsidised the development of these drainage schemes to increase our agricultural land and exports. Consequently, these drainage schemes are not only essential to some of our most productive industries, but are steeped in a history of back-breaking pioneering and form part of the cultural identity for many rural New Zealanders. It's not uncommon today to still hear stories from many farming families speaking of their parents or grandparents who were involved in the development of these drainage schemes.
So how do we get to work on drains? Well, in 2016, Living Water went through a strategic reset to figure out where best to focus our efforts. Through that process, we talked to a number of different stakeholders around Te Waihoara Lake Ellesmere, and the management of the drainage network came up multiple times as an area that needed attention. From that point on, that's where we focused our energy. And the why? Given their straight lines and deeply incised shape, agricultural drains are often perceived to have low ecological value. However, they are also tributaries of larger catchments or sensitive receiving environments. And because of this, because they result in the removing of vast areas of wetland, they often make up the only remaining habitat for many of our indigenous freshwater fauna and flora. This is a photo of the lower Ararira catchment in the L2 River, which at this point is actually a man-made drain flowing into Te Waihoara. When you realise this whole landscape was once wetland, you can see how little space is left for aquatic fauna. So what's the problem with drains? Well, they typically have high levels of nutrient, sediment and sunlight. They clog up with weeds, which then can cause flooding. To counter that and to ensure they function as drains, they need regular maintenance, typically with an excavator that mechanically removes the vegetation and sediment that's built up. Sometimes herbicides are also used, or weed cutting boats in the larger drains. These processes release pollutants into the waterways and downstream environments and destroy both habitat and many fish and invertebrate species that are removed as a bycatch by the excavator. And because they've been built for the sole purpose of conveying water away from the land, they've been designed in a way that maximises that efficiency. They're straight and deep and free of obstructions, which provides little diversity by way of habitat for aquatic species.
So what are we currently doing to mitigate these problems, and is it enough? There are currently many best practice or good management guides around for drain management, but they generally accept the maintenance practices for what they are by trying to make them essentially less bad. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a pragmatic approach to improving infrastructure that was designed before we really recognised or valued the freshwater environments as we do now. So these best practice guides are focused around the timing of mechanical works often, so avoiding spawning times, for example. They suggest only doing small reaches at a time, so fish have at least some refugia to migrate into. Some of them suggest temporary sediment filters and having someone walk behind the excavator to throw the fish that get stranded on the banks back into the drain. All of these mitigations are a bit cumbersome and inefficient from an excavator or drain management perspective, and only provide relatively small improvements from an environmental perspective. What's more, the maintenance and improvements to these systems are usually funded through historically based rating structures that are managed by regional authorities and in combination with elected drainage advisory committees. This system results in little funding for or motivation to trial alternative techniques that may improve biodiversity or cultural values. And generally speaking, the people who have got an interest in biodiversity or cultural values are not part of that governance or funding structure. So it's a system that's not really suited to making those improvements. So what else can be done? There have been a number of other trials around the place to see what alternative techniques are possible. Some of these have been done by ourselves, Living Water, at a few of our sites, and others by groups like Fish and Game or Canterbury University or others. At the Ararira site, we did a small scale, about a 500 metre length trial on Powell's Road, where we tried to enhance some existing gravel bottom drain by battering back the banks to increase the flood capacity and bank stability. We then used riparian plants and boulders to create a few narrowings and tumbling weirs to create flow diversity and fish habitat. And we planted the whole riparian margin and carrick sector, which gets quite large quite quickly and so closes over the stream and shades out the weeds. This trial was put in a few years ago now, and it's generally matured and is pretty successful. We've seen an increase in fish and invertebrate abundance and diversity and an improvement in the MODI monitoring scores. The shade has meant the weed growth isn't as problematic as it was before, and the flood flows that we've had so far have not really caused any problems. But there have been a lot of modifications and things that we've learnt along the way with this trial, and you can read more about those things on our Living Water website if you're interested. We've also done some on-farm trials with Canterbury University, where we put a sediment trap in, a two-stage channel and a wood chip biofilter, along with extensive riparian planting. This is relatively new. It's only been in place for about 18 months or so. So the monitoring is still ongoing, and the trials are looking fairly positive at this stage, but it's got a wee way to mature yet. And it's not causing any flooding, which is really great. So is it feasible to think we can just roll these sorts of improvements out along every reach and every drainage scheme? Well, probably not. Firstly, if we rebatted, planted, shaded, and put in sediment traps and biofilters everywhere, I think we would lose in massive efficiencies and strategic opportunities at looking at the catchment as a whole, but also probably be really expensive. Secondly, it took us years of developing trust with the drainage committees, Selwyn District Council and landowners before we were able to be let loose on a couple of reaches to try things that they weren't really familiar with and couldn't see the reason for, and had an obvious potential to cause flooding. The social component to changing the system is a real barrier, and the solutions need to take this element, any solutions need to take this element into consideration when we're working on it.
To get a sense of the scale of the problem and the opportunity presented by this work, this is a GIS layer that LINZ makes available from council datasets. As you can see, there is a significant area, particularly in Canterbury and Southland, with thousands of kilometres of artificial drain networks and hundreds of individual drainage schemes paid for by complicated rating schemes for one purpose only, drainage. So it appears to roll out a management approach that supports better ecological and cultural outcomes into a system that's not set up for it as somewhat of a pipe dream. So what's missing? Innovation, blue skies thinking, looking for catchment scale efficiencies and opportunities. For example, there might be obvious areas that always flood and are better suited to an alternative land use, and one that may still provide an income, like through carbon offsetting, and co-designing it with people who will value or use some aspect of the system and fully recognise that we want our lowland waterways to support not just one service or value, but many. So what if we thought about this problem differently? We're not trying to improve a current management technique reach by reach, but we're seeking to fundamentally rethink what values we want the system to support and designing a system that has appropriate governance, funding and management techniques to that specific purpose, rather than retrofitting solutions to systems that are not able or willing to support them. So what are we doing through Living Water? Well, we're going to create a catchment-wide plan for the Ararira that demonstrates how to fundamentally change the way network is designed and managed, so it enhances biodiversity and cultural values while still ensuring productive land is drained effectively. To go with this, we also create an implementation guide to identify potential financial pathways, planning, consenting implications, and phasing of works. The purpose of the implementation guide is to ensure the catchment plan is in fact practical to implement in the end. And a key component of all of this is that we develop this plan through a process of co-design, so that the final plan has buy-in and support across all stakeholders. From this, we hope to achieve two things: that the final plan is more likely to be implemented if the responsible agency and community around them are aware and have an active role in the development of the plans, and that the technical experts we're working with can hear the local context, explore and reframe the problems and solutions we come up with when the iterative and continuous cycle of learning and improvement. This is essential following the diamond design principles outlined on the screen, and where Living Water as the lead agency is providing the wraparound support for the project, the connections and relationship, leadership, storytelling and the like.
So where are we at with this project? Well, we started the project in a formal sense with the stakeholder group in February of this year, and we have been meeting monthly alongside a team of consultants to work roughly through the process outlined on the screen. We've developed a shared vision and set of values unique to the Ararira catchment, and now starting to get into the nitty-gritty of what the actual tools and solutions and where they might best be suited around the catchment. We hope that the formal work of the vision and values will help shape what those tools and solutions actually come up with. And what might it look like? So obviously we don't know yet because we're only partway through, but nothing is off the table, and we're pushing the group and technical team to come up with some blue skies thinking, at least to begin with. For example, we think that the only way to get both drainage outcomes alongside biodiversity outcomes is by putting 50-metre riparian buffers around much of the network, then we also want to match that solution to something that might actually make it feasible, like through carbon insetting or a system of biodiversity credits. And those solutions might sound a bit, high in the sky right now, but there are fast emerging markets and consumer demand driving planet positive agriculture. And in order to make the leap to that future, we must start creating practical examples and blueprints for how to get there. We hope that the Ararira Catchment Plan, implementation guide and process of co-design will go some way to achieving that.
Thanks for listening into our journey so far. If you'd like to follow along with us, you can go to the Living Water website. And if you have any comments for us directly, please feel free to contact us on the emails provided. Thanks for your time. Mā te wā.